Welcome back to The Real Story. No one is above the law. This concept is one of America's most foundational principles. And even though it's profound, it's also so simple that even a child could understand it. If we want our country to flourish, then we must hold everybody accountable to the same standards, regardless of where they come from or who they are. And that brings us to our next story today, which touches on themes of anger, accountability, justice, betrayal, and even resentment. So on that note, picture this: a Manhattan courtroom thick with tension, where Nadine Menendez, wife of the once mighty New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, breaks down in tears as she was slapped with 4.5 years behind bars on Thursday for her starring role in a jaw-dropping corruption scandal. She's looking at federal prison time for her role in her husband's bribery scheme, with the sentence being lighter than the 7-year-long sentence that prosecutors pushed for, reportedly due to her battle with breast cancer. However, it's still quite the gut punch for someone who might have believed that she was also above the law. Nadine, convicted back in April as the linchpin of this entire bribery web, wept openly at the hearing, begging for mercy while painting herself as a tragic pawn in her husband's sinister game. Strangely though, her husband, who's currently serving an 11-year prison sentence himself, blamed her at his trial last year. Which is interesting, isn't it? And this whole he said, she said leaves us wondering if she was really just a puppet, or if she was the puppet master pulling the strings. Diving deeper into the madness, and one uncovers a scheme straight out of a spy thriller. Nadine was the slick go-between, funneling bribes from Egyptian and Qatari power players, cash stuff envelopes, and gleaming gold bars right to her Democrat senator husband, who chaired the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, no less. And in exchange, Bob twisted arms in Washington, D.C. to unlock hundreds of millions of dollars in stalled Egyptian military aid, which certainly looks like something of a quid pro quo. So a 3-term powerhouse turned felon, already rotting away on an 11-year bid. It's a family affair of greed that also leaves one with several other questions. For example, did any of his colleagues in the Senate know about what was going on? Did any of them guide him or possibly participate in the scheme, directly or even indirectly? And why him? Did the power players that Menendez did business with choose him for a specific reason? There are many unanswered questions here, but one thing is crystal clear. This situation speaks to a broader issue of corruption inside the highest levels of the US government, something that everybody can agree must be addressed. Now that brings us back to right where we started. Nobody is above the law, including lawmakers themselves. Now here with his thoughts and reaction is Eric Eggers, Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute. Eric, thank you for being here.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Riley. This is a very important story, and I'm glad you're covering it with the attention it deserves.
I completely agree with you. And I want to get your initial thoughts about the senator's wife now also being sentenced to 4.5 years behind bars.
Well, Riley, you always start off our segments with a quote, so I brought one for you today. You know, it was Aristotle that said, "Where laws have no authority, there is no constitution." And I think what we found yesterday in the sentencing of Nadine Menendez is that laws do have authority, even for the people who help write them and their spouses. The fact that Senator Bob Menendez, former Senator Bob Menendez, was sentenced to 11 years for his role in this corruption scheme is, I think, at least appropriate. And there's a lot of really interesting dynamics to unpack here. I'm sympathetic to Nadine in terms of like the fact that she says, well, this is something that he may have going on without her. There are facts that support that. Remember, Bob Menendez was indicted for basically the same thing back in 2015. So this is not the first time he's been accused of this behavior. The really galling thing, Riley, there's two entities that I think should also feel a significant amount of shame in this beyond Nadine Menendez. Number one are the citizens of New Jersey, because they reelected Robert Menendez in 2018, even after he was indicted for his role in this scheme back in 2015. The second entity that should be ashamed is the United States Senate, because when he was initially indicted in 2015, Menendez had to resign his position as the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. But guess what? he was allowed to resume that position after the charges were dismissed. So, I mean, this is someone who has been playing with fire, the Menendez family, and it's a shame and a tragedy personally that he and his wife ultimately were burned.
That is really interesting. It brings me to a question then about Bob's case especially. Why this specific individual? I don't know if he was just personally close to some of these officials in Egypt or Qatar, but I do wonder, we have 50 senators in the Senate, so why him specifically?
So I'm not sure how much you saw of the coverage of the initial trial back in April, Riley, but Nadine Menendez, I think, attempted to sort of distract the jurors from the allegations of her vast accumulation of wealth. Allegations, by the way, that included gold bars and something like $400,000 in cash strewn about the Menendez household, including stuffed in the pockets of his official United States Senate blazer for Senator Menendez. Nadine tried to distract from that by showing up with what the New York Post called a cheap Amazon Prime tote bag. The problem, though, is when you show up with a bag that says Amazon Prime, it sends home the message, everything is for sale. And I think that's why people did business with the Menendezes, because he clearly, from as soon as he began to do business in the Senate, seemed open for business. He was charged or, alleged to be participating in some illicit behavior in the Dominican Republic. We mentioned the indictment in 2015. So he clearly did not set up healthy boundaries from an ethics perspective. So I think it's kind of like when you're open for business that way, the business tends to find you. And that's one of the reasons why I think he found himself in this position repeatedly.
Wow, that is really fascinating. So moving forward, clearly this is a very disturbing situation. All Americans should be concerned for a wide range of reasons, but I want to ask you, final question. What is your key takeaway looking at the situation? I mean, what does it really say to you that lawmakers would even think to engage in behavior like this in the first place?
I hate that this is not a more optimistic note, Riley, because it's a Friday. We should all feel good about ourselves. But what I think it says is that certain members of the United States Senate and Congress do this because they think they can get away with it, because they have gotten away with it for so long. The fact that Menendez did this or some version of this 10 years ago, and then his business partner ultimately had his sentence commuted, and then he had the charges dismissed, and then he was able to even resume his position on the Foreign Relations Committee, shows there's clearly a very high tolerance for this type of behavior, and they don't take the law very seriously because those are the people that write the laws themselves. There's actually a number of laws that the United States Congress is immune from that the rest of us have to abide by. So, and even the fact that Nadine Menendez, she was sentenced yesterday, but guess when she actually has to report for prison? Next July.
Wow.
I don't know that the rest of us would have this level of grace period to kind of get our affairs in order, and who knows what else she's going to try to do. So, unfortunately, there remains a set of rules for thee and a set of rules for me when you are in high positions of power in this country. And I think, this is a great win for the law and for the American people, but these wins are few and far between, I'm sorry to say.
I'm sorry to hear that as well. As an American, as a taxpayer, just as someone who would like to believe that, our leaders in Washington are above this kind of behavior, I guess not. So it's a very sobering and eye-opening moment for me, but I appreciate your insight and your perspective on this, Eric, truly.
Hey, and let's all keep an eye on the other Menendez. His son is also starting a term in the House. So the family business may continue, Riley. So stay tuned.
Okay, will do.